Salutations, respected viewers. This is George from Ireland. Behind me is a statue of Jawaharlal Nehru, the first Prime Minister of India. So it's perhaps ironic that he should be honoured in the United Kingdom, bearing in mind he was imprisoned by the British authorities a few times in India. So he was born in November 1889 in Delhi, which was not then the capital of India. At that time it was Kolkata, or as we used to call it, Calcutta. His family were Kashmiri Hindus, but they lived in Delhi for some time beside a canal, or Nehar as it was, and that's the etymology of his surname Nehru. You should read about his autobiography to get a bit more. It's fascinating, discussing how his grandfather was arrested by some British soldiers during the mutiny of 1857, or as many prefer to call it, the First National War of Independence. And they suspected him of being a mutineer. They could have hanged him, but he knew a little English, was able to delay matters, the soldiers calmed down, and his life was spared. Anyway, his father qualified as a barrister, and Motilal Nehru was highly successful, and he could afford to send his son, Jawaharlal, to Harrow School. He came here at the age of 15, Harrow being one of the two most illustrious schools in the United Kingdom, indeed in the British Empire. And his housemaster said that this boy, Nehru, almost never caused trouble. He was also in the Officer Training Corps, as in doing military training. He took a lively interest in politics, writing a lot about Sir David Campbell Bannerman becoming Prime Minister, leading the Liberal Party into office. And then went up to Cambridge. He was at Trinity, which was the grandest college of all. There were a few Indian undergraduates at the time, and they had a society called the Majlis. Majlis could be a parliament or just a discussion forum, and they had to pay a fine if they said nothing in any discussion. And he happily paid the fine a few times. There he was reading natural sciences. He said there were some quiet, happy years by the Cam, that's the river that bisects Cambridge. He then came down to London and read for the bar. He qualified as a barrister and immediately returned home to India, where he prospered in practice. His father said proudly that for his first brief, Jawaharlal was paid 100 times more than his father had been. So sorry, they were living in Allahabad. I think they had lived in Delhi a generation earlier. Allahabad is where the Ganges and is it the Yamuna, they divide. Or have I got the other way around? I have been to his house in Allahabad, incidentally. So although he was Hindu, he was not particularly religious. And it was not a lively, political-minded person at that stage. He was informed about politics, but didn't seem to have any decided opinion. He had an arranged marriage, that was that. He had one daughter, Indira Priyadarshini, as in a middle name means dear to the sight. Unfortunately, his wife died quite young. They did have a son as well, who also perished in infancy. So Nehru, who then joined the International Congress, which had been founded in 1885, it had been founded with the blessing of the British authorities to provide critical analysis of what the colonial authorities were doing in India. However, it became more oppositional. One of the major issues around 1905 was the Partition of Bengal, which foreshadowed the partition of India. Should Bengal be divided into Hindu and Muslim sections? The Muslim League, which was a Muslim group within Congress, lobbied for that very hard. The British authorities acceded to this request. Hindus were mostly very against, and some Muslims were too. Eventually the decision was reversed, so it was a highly controversial issue. There were some very advanced nationalists who began using force of arms to try and terminate British rule, assassinating officials, police officers and so on. Nehru wasn't into that at all. Then the First World War broke out, and he supported the British war effort without too much enthusiasm. But like a lot of people in Congress, he expected a very substantial reform after this. And the Viceroy at the time was not willing to give an explicit promise that there would be substantial reform. Some Indians were pushing for Dominion home rule. They wanted India put on an equal footing with places like Australia and Canada, India to be largely self-governing. And after the First World War, the British government was not willing to accede to that. 1919, the First World War was still officially on until June 1919, when the Treaty of Versailles was signed. So extraordinary security legislation was passed, allowing for people to be detained without trial, even though the war wasn't actually being fought, and for extensive powers of censorship. And Nehru found this unacceptable. He thought the British were betraying their own tradition of liberty. There were massive protests against this. Anyway, against Rowlatt's Black Act. Rowlatt was the politician responsible for it. His great-great-grandson is a BBC correspondent these days. Anyway, then there's the Jallianwala Bagh massacre of April 1919. I shan't detail in that in this video. That atrocity took place in Amritsar. So his moderation was no more, and he was furious with the British authorities. They'd really shaken his faith, and he happened to share a railway carriage with Brigadier General Dyer, who was responsible for the Amritsar massacre, and he overheard Dyer saying he had thought of killing more people, but then he took pity on the place. So then Nehru was campaigning for independence, and there was a non-cooperation movement. Edward VIII came to visit India. He wasn't Edward VIII at the time, he was the Prince of Wales. And traditionally, monarchs and princes and princesses, they landed at Mumbai, or Bombay as it then was. Should they land there or not? The non-cooperators planned big protests. But that would be embarrassing if that went ahead. It would embarrass the crown. But then again, to show a loss of nerve would be more humiliating. So they decided it was less risky to go ahead. And they were greeted by crowds, thin crowds. There was a pleasant reception. There were some protests. It wasn't too bad for the British authorities. So I won't go into all his travails, in and out of jail in the 20s, in the 30s, Congress briefly banned. But in the end, he became leader of the Congress Party. His father died without seeing his dreams come to fruition. And his daughter, Indira Gandhi, she went to school in Switzerland and badminton here in the United Kingdom. So he was definitely not against British things in his cultural tastes. He had been wearing Western-style suits, but by the 20s he was mostly wearing Indian khadi cloth and the Nehru cap, which he's so well known, which railway porters in India wear. 1935, there was the India Act. The provinces were to be self-governed. There was diarchy. There were elected governments, Congress, the Muslim League, the Hindu Mahasabha, the Liberal Party, Communists and so on, in various provinces running internal matters at provincial level. But in Delhi at the centre, there was the Viceroy. There was also the Chamber of Princes. There were about 600 hereditary rulers with various titles like Maharaja, Gaekwar, Shah, Nawab, Raja. I could go on. And these hereditary rulers were there in their Chamber of Princes, a bit like the House of Lords, but it wasn't a democratic thing. Remember, about a third of India's territory and about a quarter of India's population were made up of princely states where there were hereditary rulers ruling almost absolutely. They would have a resident there as a British official to cooperate with them, to try and see they were doing nothing that the British government found completely unacceptable. Anyway, the First World War came, and the Viceroy, Lord Linlithgow, he declared war without even consulting the Congress Party or the other Indian political leaders, and the law permitted him to do so. So Nehru and his confrères were enraged, and they said, all right, if you grant us immediate independence, we will instantly declare war on the Third Reich. But the British authorities said no, because Congress might not honour their promise. They might declare war, but do no fighting, or they might declare war and they can make peace at any time. Moreover, by this stage, the Muslim League was pushing for partition. So after a couple of months, the Congress governments in the various provinces resigned, which again was perhaps a curious move, because then it was putting the provinces back into British administration. By 1943, it was clear India was going to get independence imminently, even though Churchill was the Prime Minister, disliked that. So Stafford Cripps, a Labour politician, went out to India, the Cripps Mission, to promises to Congress and indeed the Muslim League. The Muslim League were not agitating for independence. What they really wanted was what was best for the Muslim community, and they didn't necessarily think that was independence, at least not in the short term. So that's why Jinnah spent not one day in prison. Perhaps Nehru should have been smarter. If he hadn't irked the British authorities so much, then Congress might have got a better deal in 1947. Anyway, 1945 the war was over. Lord Wavell was soon removed, 1947. He'd formerly been commander of the Indian Army before he was Viceroy, and Lord Mountbatten came out. So Queen Victoria's great-grandson was there, and there are all sorts of rumours swirling that Edwina Mountbatten, that's Lord Louis's wife, was having an extramarital liaison with Jawaharlal Nehru. But Nehru's sister said that's not true, because he vouchsafed to me that he was impotent by that stage. And another thing, yes, it is possible for a man and woman to be just good friends. And so there are all sorts of wild conspiracy theories, especially going around Pakistan, that Pakistan got a raw deal on the basis that he was the paramour of Lady Mountbatten. Anyway, 14th of August 1947, Pakistan was born. The following day, India came into being, and he gave his world-renowned speech about that we have a tryst with destiny. At the stroke of the midnight hour, as the world sleeps, India awakes to life and destiny, life and freedom. Actually, his oration was delivered with a distinct lack of panache. So he ruled on until he died in 1964. His daughter became Prime Minister a couple of years later when Lal Bahadur Shastri died in mysterious circumstance in Tashkent. He was there in Uzbekistan as part of the peace negotiations between India and Pakistan after the Second Indo-Pak War. Uzbekistan was part of the Soviet Union at the time. So that is Nehru. I've been to the house he lived in Delhi as well. He was cremated as per his wishes, and he insisted that no portion of his ashes be retained. So we're right beside India House, as in the Indian High Commission. You can see up there, supporting the balconies, various elephants and various coats of arms of India right there. A very aesthetically pleasing building, I think you might agree. I don't think anybody comes out onto this balcony. So that's Nehru.